What if I told you that if I took away everything you own today, your savings, your investments, your car, even your house, I'd still be confident that I could become financially free again? Not because I'm lucky, not because I know a secret stock, and definitely not because I can predict the market. I'd be confident because I know the system. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't have a money problem. They have a system problem. That's why two people can earn exactly the same salary. One retires wealthy. The other spends 40 years working and still lives paycheck to paycheck. Today, I'm going to show you the exact blueprint I'd follow if I had to rebuild my wealth from absolute zero. No gambling, no get rich quick, no unrealistic promises. Just principles that have worked for decades. And by the end of this video, you'll realize something surprising. Building wealth is actually much simpler than most people think. But it's also much harder than most people are willing to do. Why most people never become wealthy? Let's be honest. When most people think about becoming rich, they immediately ask questions like, what stock should I buy? Is Bitcoin still worth it? What's the next Nvidia? What AI company will explode? They're asking the wrong question. Imagine two people. David spends every evening searching YouTube. He's looking for the next millionaire stock. Every week, he buys something different. Tesla, then crypto, then gold, then AI. Then he sells everything because someone on Twitter scared him. Now, meet Emma. Emma never tries to predict the future. Instead, every month, on the same date, she invests part of her salary. She doesn't care if markets are up. She doesn't care if they're crashing. She just keeps investing. Now, here's the question. Who do you think becomes wealthier after 20 years? Most people say David, because David is working harder. But history says Emma wins. Every single time. Because investing isn't about making brilliant decisions. It's about making good decisions. Over and over and over again. Think about going to the gym. Imagine someone who works out for 12 hours once a month. Sounds impressive, right? Now imagine someone else who trains 45 minutes 3 times a week for 10 years. Who gets the better body? Obviously the second person. Money works exactly the same way. Small actions, repeated consistently, create extraordinary results. Not because each action is special, but because time multiplies everything. That's a concept most people completely underestimate. And understanding it changes your financial life forever. Starting with a small amount can actually make you a better investor than someone who starts with $100,000. And that's exactly what I'll show you next. The lie we were all told. Growing up, most of us learned one financial rule. Work hard, save money, everything will be okay. But there's one problem. Inflation doesn't care how hard you work. Let's say you save $10,000. Sounds responsible. Now imagine inflation averages 3% a year. Without doing anything, your purchasing power quietly shrinks, year after year. It's like filling a bucket that has a tiny hole in the bottom. At first, you don't notice. 10 years later, you realize the bucket was leaking the entire time. This is why simply saving money isn't enough anymore. Your money has to work, because if it isn't growing, it's slowly falling behind. And that's the biggest shift wealthy people understand. They don't only work for money, they make money work for them. But here's where almost everyone makes a massive mistake. The moment they hear the word investing, they immediately think, I need a lot of money. That's completely false. In fact, the biggest myth about investing? I don't have enough money. If I had $1 for every time someone told me I'll start investing when I make more money, I probably wouldn't need to invest anymore. It's one of the most common excuses in the world, but it's also one of the most dangerous because it sounds logical. Think about it. If you can't invest $100 today, what makes you believe you'll suddenly invest $1,000 later? The amount isn't the problem. The habit is. Let me tell you about two friends. Jake and Chris both graduate from college. They land similar jobs. Both earn around $50,000 a year. Jake tells himself, I'll wait until I get promoted. Then he says, I'll wait until I buy a house. Then I'll wait until life gets less expensive. Chris does something different. He starts investing just $150 every month. Not because it's a lot, but because he wants to build the habit. 10 years later, Jake is finally earning six figures. Chris is too, but Chris has something Jake doesn't. A decade of experience, a portfolio that's been compounding for years, and most importantly, a financial habit that's now automatic. The difference wasn't income, it was time. The power of tiny decisions. Here's something fascinating. Imagine you invest just $200 every month. Nothing crazy. No lottery wins, no inheritance, no trading. Just $200. If your investments grow at an average annual return of around 10%, after 30 years, you've invested about $72,000. But your portfolio could be worth over $400,000. Not because you kept adding huge amounts, but because your money started making money. And eventually, your money's money started making money. That's compounding. Albert Einstein supposedly called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world. Whether he actually said it or not doesn't matter, because the math speaks for itself. Imagine planting a bamboo tree. For years, nothing exciting happens. You water it, you take care of it, still almost nothing. Then suddenly, it shoots upward incredibly fast. Most people think success happens overnight. What they don't see are the years of invisible growth underneath. Investing works exactly the same way. The first few years feel slow, painfully slow. But then something incredible happens. Growth begins to accelerate. Not because you changed your strategy, but because time finally caught up. Why rich people rarely chase hot stocks? Let's play a quick game. If I asked you, what was the hottest company in the world 20 years ago? You might say Nokia, or Yahoo, or BlackBerry. Back then, people thought those companies were unstoppable. Today, most young people barely remember them. Now, imagine someone who invested every dollar into Nokia in 2007. They believed they found the perfect company. Instead, they found the perfect lesson. Never confuse a great company with a guaranteed investment. Because markets change, technology changes, consumer behavior changes. That's why professional investors don't try to predict which single company will dominate forever. Instead, they spread their money across hundreds, sometimes thousands of companies, because they know something most beginners don't. You don't need to pick the winner if you own the entire race. So the question becomes, if buying individual stocks isn't the smartest place to begin, then what is? There's one investment strategy that has quietly created more millionaires than almost anything else. Ironically, it's also one of the most boring investments you can make. And that's exactly why it works. In the next chapter, I'll show you why boring is one of the most profitable words in investing. Why boring investments create millionaires. The investment almost nobody talks about. Have you ever noticed something strange? Whenever people talk about investing, they almost always mention companies. Apple, Tesla, Nvidia, Amazon, Bitcoin. But almost nobody talks about owning the entire market. And that's exactly where many long-term investors quietly build their wealth. Not by chasing the next big thing, but by owning a tiny piece of hundreds of great businesses at once. Imagine you're walking through a huge orchard. One person says, I'm going to bet everything on this one apple tree. Maybe that tree produces amazing fruit. Or maybe a disease kills it next year. Now imagine someone else says, instead of buying one tree, I'll own a small part of every tree in the orchard. Some trees will fail. Some will explode with growth. But overall, the orchard keeps producing fruit year after year. Which strategy sounds safer? That's exactly what an index fund does. What is an index fund? An index fund is one of the simplest financial inventions ever created. Think of it like ordering a variety pizza. Instead of buying only pepperoni or only mushrooms, you get a slice of everything. Now imagine replacing pizza slices with companies. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Coca-Cola, Visa, Johnson & Johnson, Costco, hundreds of businesses inside one investment. So when one company struggles, another might be breaking records. Your risk is spread across the entire economy. That's why millions of investors love index funds. They're simple, they're inexpensive, and historically, they've performed incredibly well over long periods. Example, let's do a quick thought experiment. Imagine it's 2010. You have $10,000. Option 1, you invest everything into BlackBerry. At the time, BlackBerry looked unstoppable. Millions of people used their phones. Businesses depended on them. Investors loved them. Fast forward a few years, and smartphones completely changed the industry. BlackBerry almost disappeared. Now imagine you invested the same money into an S&P 500 index fund. Yes, BlackBerry declined, but Apple exploded. Microsoft grew. Amazon multiplied. Nvidia became one of the biggest companies on Earth. Instead of relying on one winner, you own them all. That's the power of diversification.
The biggest mistake beginners make. Here's something interesting. Most beginners believe diversification means lower profits. Actually, it's the opposite. Diversification doesn't stop you from becoming rich. It stops one bad decision from making you poor. Professional investors understand something most people ignore. No matter how smart you are, you will be wrong sometimes. The goal isn't to always be right. The goal is to survive your mistakes. Because surviving long enough allows compounding to do its job. Let's say you own 10 businesses. One fails, another struggles, 2 stay average, but 3 become massive successes. That's enough to completely change your portfolio. Now, compare that to someone who owns only one company. If that company fails, their entire investment disappears. This is why experienced investors think differently. They're not looking for perfection. They're building resilience.
Why average usually wins most professional fund managers? The people paid millions of dollars every year fail to beat the market consistently. Read that again. People with research teams, Bloomberg terminals, and decades of experience often underperform a simple index fund. That's one of the craziest facts in investing. So, if professionals struggle to beat the market, why do beginners believe they can? Sometimes doing less actually produces more. But now comes the biggest question of all. If investing is this simple, why doesn't everyone become wealthy? Because knowing what to do and actually doing it are 2 completely different things. The biggest enemy of investors isn't the market. It's human psychology. Fear, greed, impatience. And that's exactly what we're talking about next. Because if you can't control your emotions, your money will eventually control you.